So I just finished writing my PhD dissertation the other day, and it feels just so surreal, honestly. I never saw myself getting to this point. It was just hard to imagine that I would be done with this close to 200-page PDF. But it's done. It's written. I have written it. Obviously, I still have to defend it and I have to proofread it before I submit it to the UCI libraries, but the writing is done for the most part. And I wanted to make a video trying to convey to you just what went into this document and try and give you a sense of how it all went and what's it all about. So for those of you who may not know me and are new to my channel, my name is Kyle. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of California, Irvine. And my dissertation title is right here, and it is Black Holes and Revelations, Dynamical Mass Measurements of Supermassive Black Holes in Early Type Galaxies with ALMA and HST. Yes, I know, that is a mouthful of a title, and I know that the first few words are the title of a Muse album, so this is to Muse. Please don't hit me with a lawsuit. This is just my very humble contribution to science. I love your work, and that is probably my favorite album from you guys, so this is not trying to rip you guys off, so just get the disclaimer out of the way. So hopefully Muse won't come at me with a lawsuit. But anyways, besides that disclaimer, let's talk a little bit about what was required of me, and then the contents, how I wrote it, and what comes next. So let's start. Was there any requirements for this dissertation? No, actually, interestingly enough, there is no page or word requirement from my department side. It's very dependent on the department, not even just the school, but like the department that you are a part of in grad school. And so for the Department of Physics and Astronomy, I looked in the handbook. There really is no page or word limit to this dissertation. So that kind of gave me the freedom to make it as long or as short as I wanted it to be. But because I had written some papers in graduate school, I was able to just put those papers in for the most part and have a fairly substantial dissertation. So I've seen dissertations that are as short as like 50 pages, but as long as like 200 and maybe like 50 pages. So my document that's at 191 pages, that is kind of, a little bit on the higher end. But to be honest, most of that, not most, but, some part of that 191 is not just like the actual work. There's like a bibliography that's like 15-ish pages. There is like table of contents. There's acknowledgments. There's an abstract. I have a CV in there. So all that other stuff I think takes up over 30 pages. So really the dissertation content, the part that you would actually read, is about 155, I think, double spaced. So yeah, that was the length of my document. I think it was like 33,000-ish words. I know some other departments might have word requirements of more than that. I think the humanities, I've seen dissertation lengths suggested to be like 80,000 to 100,000 words, which is it's mind-boggling to me. But nonetheless, there was no requirements for me, and so I made it as long as I felt like it needed to be. And I wrote it in LaTeX, so I have a template in Overleaf that was provided to me by my university, so LaTeX is just the best. I love LaTeX. Wish it had a spell checker, though. That would have been kind of nice, as opposed to having to read it. There probably is a spell checking setting, but I don't think it's as like nice as like Word's setting, so whatever. That's just how it is. So that, in essence, was the length of my dissertation. Now let's talk a little bit about how I organized it and the content. So in terms of the content, I have 8 chapters. Chapter 1 is an introduction chapter, just giving the context as to what the field is all about and how my research fits into the context of everything else that has been done. And then chapter 2 is the methods section. So I developed a framework in Python to take astronomical data and then produce a mass measurement of a supermassive black hole, or essentially just built this modeling framework to weigh supermassive black holes. Weigh is technically not the technically scientifically correct term to use, but I use it as a way to sort of explain that that's essentially what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to figure out how much mass does this thing have. So chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all measurements in papers that have either been submitted for review or are currently published. So chapters 3 and 4, those are published works. And chapters 5 and 6, I just submitted the paper. I made a video about it a few weeks ago on a couple of measurements that I just recently finished up. So yeah, a good portion of my dissertation is my published or submitted work. And then chapter 7 is kind of just like a hodgepodge of all the other black hole masses that I tried to measure, but just didn't have the time to extensively get into the modeling process and do as extensive amount of testing as I did in the previous chapters. So that's chapter 7. And then chapter 8 is just the conclusion. I like the conclusion chapter a lot because I spent a lot of time to comb the literature and find all the previous measurements made with the telescope that I use, ALMA. And, surprisingly, it's on the order of about like 20 to 30, I think it's like 25 published measurements in terms of unique galaxies that have had their black holes measured with this particular telescope. And my dissertation has 8 measurements, so that gives you an idea of just how relatively new and recent this field is. The telescope went online about I think 10 years ago in 2013. But the first black hole mass measurement in the table that I created is from 2015. So it's only been making measurements over the past 8 years. I got involved with my PhD and this research back in 2018 technically. So I've been in part of I've been part of this new wave of ALMA black hole research, and it's been very exciting. And I think the final chapter was really cool, kind of putting the work I have in my dissertation in context with everything else that has been done. And I made this plot that I think is honestly one of the most beautiful plots I've ever made in my entire life, just putting my work in context with everything else. And so if you are interested in reading the dissertation, it will be available online after I submit it to the UCI libraries. So I think I'll make a video about that at a later date when it's out. And in conclusion, I wrote the darn thing. I can't believe it. In this next part of the video, I want to talk a little bit about the difficulties of writing it and how soon I started writing, any tips I have for people who want to write, and stuff of that nature. So in terms of writing this dissertation, I made it a point to try and start early. As soon as I had content from my first paper that I published about a year ago, I already had the template in hand, and I was just putting things in at the start, just putting in like the figures and writing a little bit about like the intro and the methods, because that stuff I already kind of had written about in detail for my paper. And so I think starting as early as you possibly can is a great thing. You can never start too early writing your dissertation. That is definitely a fact. And I would also say change the location of where you write. That's what worked for me. Unless, of course, you can focus ultra well in one place for a long period of time. I cannot. So I had the pleasure of just moving around because for my last 2 quarters in grad school, my department gave me funding to just focus on my dissertation. I didn't have funding from either my advisor or from like a fellowship or from like a TA-ship. So the department was like, oh, you're close to finishing your dissertation? Okay, just graduate by June. Here's some money, but graduate by June. So I'm very grateful for UCI for giving me the funds, the department specifically. Yeah, I mean, I wrote in a multitude of places. I wrote here, right where I'm sitting in my apartment. I wrote in my office, though, to be honest, I have a hard time focusing in my office. It has no windows, so it's just really hard for me to just settle down and focus there. I wrote in quite a few coffee shops on campus and just out in the Irvine area. I wrote in the library. The library is a really good place to write. Who would have thought? But the library at UCI has a graduate and faculty room. Essentially, it's a room where you need a card key to get access. And it is really nice because it's super, super quiet. And everyone's just sort of in there and like working really hard. And so the science library, faculty and graduate reading room is definitely a great place to work. Now what I would like to do is just talk a little bit about my feelings about the whole thing and how I have come out of this experience. I feel very proud, honestly. I feel very proud because it's pretty wild to me that I wrote this whole thing. I mean, it's such a daunting task to just be told, you have to write this 200-ish page document or whatever. And I think I learned the value of just sort of being consistent, just bringing whatever energy I had in any given day to just doing a little bit if that's all I could do. Some days you just really don't feel like writing, at least I didn't. And I brought myself to the computer and was like, okay, you can do these little things. You can work on the captions and the figures. You can organize the sections a little bit better. You can just write the intro paragraph for some of these sections, especially for the stuff that I did not previously write, like the stuff that wasn't submitted or published work. And actually, the stuff that was submitted and published, I actually had to change it up a bit because in those papers, I had talked about both measurements. So I measured two different black holes in each of the papers I published. And in the papers, they were sort of talked about jointly, and figures were made with both of them together, and tables were made with both of them together. But then for the dissertation, I was advised by my advisor to try and split it up and make all these measurements their own separate chapter. And so, as opposed to just verbatim copying my papers into the thesis, I actually had to restructure them. I had to change the way that I talked about these galaxies, because I would often say in the papers, like, both galaxies explain this, and NGC 1380 and NGC 6861 have this quantity, and so I had to sort of split them up. So NGC 1380 is its one chapter, NGC 6861, these are galaxies, is its own chapter, and then make sure I'm not referring to the other one in their respective solo chapters. So it was little things like that had to get changed up, but that's not necessarily very hard. The hard part was definitely coming up with new stuff, new writing, like in chapter 7, which was all the measurements that hadn't been previously written about before. And then the conclusion was also kind of fun to write, because it was just sort of a way for me to think about how everything was sort of in context with everything else. And I decided to write in the first person. So I decided to write with I a lot and my models and stuff of that nature. To be honest, that's kind of how it was. I did do all of the work pretty much, but when you write in scientific papers that you publish with a collaboration, there was a lot of we talk, and we did this, we did that. But I did find it kind of nice to like give myself the credit and say in my dissertation, yeah, I measured the black hole, and I made the models that did this, and I tested that, and it was it felt nice. It felt like it helped me write it, because it was like, yeah, this was my experience. I am the one who did the research, so let me say I did it. And with that, I think that will be the end of the video. I hope you found this insightful as to how a PhD student writes their dissertation. It's been a long, long journey. I still have to defend my dissertation in about 3 weeks. So starting tomorrow, I'm getting on that and making my presentation and going to be rehearsing quite extensively. But that's kind of the final thing I have to do in grad school. It's been quite a ride. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who has been following my videos over the past couple of years. It's been so fun to document different parts of my journey in graduate school, and it's just surreal to think that the end is this near. So with that, I end the video. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.